Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and welcome to another walk through the cards. Today we'll be taking a stroll through the otherworldly dreamscape of the Field Tarot. I will share with you my thoughts about the cards and my impressions of this deck as we wander through the 78 cards of this tarot. We'll take a quick peek at the guidebook and wrap up our time together with a pull from this deck. The Field Tarot is an intuitive tool designed to help us navigate our inner and outer journeys through the connection of art and spirituality with the ancient tradition of tarot. The field refers to the sacred space where we commune with the tarot. The predominant horizontal line featured on many of the cards draws the reader into this space, allowing you to connect the traditional tarot journey to your own personal experience. The Field Tarot is a colorful and feminine, independently published deck created by Hannah Elizabeth Fofana. Let's take a stroll through the Field Tarot. So we begin our journey as we always do with the Fool, and here we have the Fool as being retitled as Beginnings. And I do quite like this representation of the Fool. As I mentioned in the introduction, that horizontal line does feature predominantly in a lot of the cards, and that's something that I have grown to look for. I do like this card as a Fool. It does have a very sparse sense of new beginnings, of there's just a blank horizon, an empty canvas before you, and I do quite like that. I like the little addition of the tattoo there. Perhaps maybe that is the influences of past lives pulling into this current soul journey. There's lots of different ways that you can read that, I think. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more in terms of diversity, but overall I really do generally enjoy the art style of this deck. So here we have the Magician, and I do like, again, the sparsity, the simplicity that features in this deck. Here we have, again, the horizontal line, and we have a sun or a planet up here, and we sort of get that sense of the as above, so below within this card. But again, it's very simplified, and I do quite enjoy that about this deck. I love his cloak with all the traditional flowers being pulled in. We don't see the four symbols of the minor arcana represented in this card as we often do, but I think it still works really well for a Magician card. So here we have the beautiful High Priestess, and I do quite like her. I like that she's sitting on that flower throne. We are sort of missing that sense of the veil behind her, which I would have really liked to seen. But I think she's a beautiful High Priestess. Quite honestly, she feels a little more Empressy to me. I think it's the fact that she's on a throne and we don't have a veil, but I can still work with it as the High Priestess. Again, I love the simplicity of the card. It's very simple, it's very understated, but yet it is a powerful card. So I think that's really beautiful. So here we have the Empress, which is sadly one of my least favorite cards in this deck. We do see some collaging going on in this deck. I'm not really sure of the art style. There's some collaging going on we can see in the background. And I do like that within this deck. This, however, is just not one of my favorite cards because I just really don't get an Empress feel out of it. Like I said, this feels to me more like the Empress. But again, that's just personal preference. It's a beautifully rendered card, but again, just not making that Empress connection for me. Here we have the Emperor, which I do quite like, and if we were going to use a wolf as an Emperor, I would have liked to have seen a wolf here rather than a lioness for the Empress. But again, personal preference. I do like to see them as sort of a matching pair, but I do really like this Emperor, and I think he's very powerful. Again, we can see some details of some kind of collaging, some overlay in the background, which is really beautiful. And I think he's a wonderful, powerful Emperor. So here we have the Hierophant, which is very traditional, very Pope-like. So I think it really works in that sense. But again, if you watch my other walkthroughs, I kind of prefer to move away from the Pope-esque cards in the Hierophant and more towards a teacher type of card. But again, personal preference, it is a lovely Hierophant card. So here we have the Lovers, which we do quite enjoy, and as you can probably see, there is that very young feel to it. Even our Hierophant here still has a very young feel to him, and generally I don't care for really overly youthful decks because, you know, that's just not the time of my life that I'm in. That was many, many years ago for me. But I think the fact that they're not realistic, it works a little bit better for me. Again, I like the use of the tattoos, and they are kind of intermingled, which I think is really beautiful. So here we have the Chariot, which I quite like. It's very, again, very simple. We just have the black and white horse, and we have this lovely moon, and we can see there's sort of a darker side to echo this side, this black horse, and then we have the lighter side over here to echo the white horse. And I just really like that sense of balance. Again, beautiful card. My favorite cards in this deck are the ones that do not include people, and I think they are beautiful and simple and stunning and just really, really work for me. So here we have Justice in position 8, which I do like to see. I prefer my Justice card to be at 8 and my Strength to be at 11, but that's just how I see the progression of the Fool's Journey in my world. And I do like her as Justice. We're missing those scales that we often see, but we definitely have the sword, and I think she is quite lovely. So here we have the Hermit, which I do quite like. She has a lovely dress on with some birds, and again we see that overlaying texture. She has her lantern. She looks a little bit like she's off in the woods camping, and maybe you know, finding her way through the woods, and I think that's really lovely. I like that about this card. Love to see a female hermit. I think that's really lovely. So here we have Fortune for the Wheel. Would have liked to have seen that titled The Wheel rather than Fortune, but again, totally personal preference. I do like that we have the black and white cats in here, and I do like the black and white division with the horizontal line. It's a little bit reminiscent of the Eudes Picard minors, which I quite enjoy. His are among some of my favorites, even though this is of course a major, but it pulls that essence in, and I quite like that. So here we have Strength, which is a very lovely Strength card. However, we're missing that lion, and I do like to see the lion in my Strength card. It just, to me, that it provides that balance between the inner and outer strengths, the human nature and the animal nature, and I like to see that blend. So for me, that's kind of missing in this particular card, but she is lovely and she does make a beautiful Strength card. However, if you took the title and the number off, I probably wouldn't know that that was Strength, but again, she's beautiful. However, again, very young and thin. Here we have Perspective in place of the Hanged Man, and I don't mind because I see the Hanged Man as perspective. This particular retitling works quite well for me, and I love all of the shift in perspective that we see in this card, and I think it simply and very elegantly states that idea. So here we have the Death card, which I do actually quite like, except for the skull. I like the idea of the skull, but he looks a little cheesy to me. I love the flowers and I love the crisscross background going on here. So we definitely get that sense of growth out of Death, and I think there's everything that you need to read within a Death card here. I just wish he didn't have quite such a cheesy grin, because he looks pretty thrilled with himself. But again, it's a beautiful card and I really do like it. So here we have Temperance, which is quite lovely. We have the, definitely get the sense of balance with this. We have the 2 cups. Again, she does look very young and modern, but again, like I said, they're not realistic people, so I can work with it a little bit better. We have that beautiful horizontal line again. Just again, the simplicity of this deck is really what gets me. Here we have the Devil, which I quite like, and as you can see, that is the image that is, or the emblem that is represented on the box. And I think this is a gorgeous Devil card. We definitely don't get any of that traditional sense of maybe temptation, or as I tend to see the Devil as the shadow self. I don't really get that in this card. However, this is a very light deck overall, very floral, very feminine, and so if it were a really, really dark card, that would probably be a stark contrast that would not mesh well with the rest of the deck. So I think that for a Devil, it works really well. I love the horns, the kind of skull figure. I think it's just beautiful. Again, very simple, but very stunning. So here we have the Tower, which I think is just a wonderful tower. Very simple, very understated, but we definitely get that idea of, the lightning striking the tower, that change is coming. Here in this particular tower, we don't see any sort of destruction. So I think that we could take that sometimes to mean that, change is coming, but it's not always necessarily destructive. Maybe it doesn't completely upset your world because you are built on that stable foundation. Just a lot of different ways that I think you can read this, but that's just one of the things that I noted is generally wherever we see the lightning strike the tower, we see that little bit of crumbling, that destruction. Sometimes the whole top is gone, but we don't get any of that in this sense. It's definitely a stable structure that is surviving the storm that's going on around it. And I think that's an interesting interpretation for the tower. So here we have the star card, which is quite lovely. I love all of the peaks that are overlaid with the floral pattern in the background. Again, we see that horizontal line. And we see this square, this triangle, diamond shaped up here, representing the star. And I think it's a lovely star card. I think it works. I like her reflection in the water. I think it's beautiful. So here we have the moon, which again is another quite lovely card. I love the flowers in it. That growth that's represented there. But we still have that sort of darkness or maybe shadow represented in the darker sky versus the lighter grass area or lighter background. Definitely not traditionals. We don't see those towers. We don't see the wolf and the dog or the crayfish, but I think you could definitely read it as the moon. So here we have the beautiful sun card, which is actually one of my favorite cards in this deck. And that's usually not the case for sun cards for me. I love the peaks with all the texture and the sun with all the burst coming out around it. It's just beautiful. So here we have Judgment, which again is actually another one of my favorite cards in this deck. This is a gorgeous Judgment card. We see the reflection of the swan in the water, and I think that is really indicative of judgment, of taking a look at yourself. And, as we all know the story of the ugly duckling, that's what I think of when I see this card of the ugly duckling that grew up into the beautiful swan. And I think that's a really lovely message for judgment. I have no idea if that was the creator's intention, but that is what I take out of it. And it works beautifully for me. And finally, we come to the Universe, which is actually another one of my favorite cards in this deck. We see some of that overlay, again, of the floral. And what I really like about this is we have kind of the sky, maybe our sky, our earthly sky, and then the heavenly sky or the cosmos sky, which I think is really beautiful. And I love I don't know if those are planets or if that's supposed to represent the planets, but it looks a little reminiscent of the chakras, which I think is really great. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I think it's really beautiful. So again, simple, understated, but really works for me. So that is our major arcana. So moving into our minor arcana, we're going to begin with our suit of wands. And here we see the beautiful Ace of Wands. All of the minor arcana cards do have a keyword at the bottom, which for the most part does represent a more Waite-Smith type of interpretation, I think, for the most part. However, the majority of the minors are pippish, at least in the numbered minors, which I absolutely love. There are a few people that feature, but it is a predominantly pip style deck, which I like. So I personally might just chop those off. I haven't decided yet, but just did want to point that out. So here we have the beautiful Ace of Wands, and I think it's just a lovely representation. So here we have the Two of Wands with the keyword of planning. And again, we see a lot of crystals or crystal type imagery on the top of our wands, which I do quite like. So move a little bit quicker through the minors. Here we have the gorgeous Three of Wands with the keyword of vision, which is an interesting one, but again, not what I would associate with the Three of Wands. I love the Three Wands creating the triangle within the triangle, and we have this, center universe or center world looking emblem, and I think it's just absolutely beautiful. Very pippish, which I quite like. So here we have our Four of Wands with the keyword of celebration. Again, not how I see the Four of Wands, but It is a gorgeous card. I love the simplicity of it. We definitely get that idea of stability, and that is really what I'm looking for in my fours. So it's beautiful. So here we have the Five of Wands with the keywords of competition. I don't associate the Five of Wands with competition anyway, and I definitely don't see any sort of competition within this card. So I feel like that keyword was maybe added a little bit as an afterthought. But either way, I think it's a beautiful image, and I love the simplicity of the Five Wands. However, I don't get a real sense of disruption within this imagery. We might be able to see there's some jaggedy things going on in the background. Maybe we could tap into that to pull in that disruption, but it's a gorgeous image, but it kind of misses the mark a little bit for me for the Five of Wands. So here we have our Six of Wands with the keyword of success, and we have a character that features in this one. And I feel like this card would have been better without the character, without the person in it, but that's just me, and I prefer a more pip style deck anyway. But I do really like the Six Wands creating that balance on either side of her, because that's kind of how I see the sixes as a harmony, and I definitely can pull that out of this card. So here we have the Seven of Wands with the keyword of valor. And again, beautiful card. It does feature another character, and it's a beautiful Seven of Wands. I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker. Here we have the Eight of Wands with the keyword of movement, and I think that one definitely works with this card. I love all the crystal tipped wands. I think that's really beautiful. So here we have the Nine of Wands with resilience, which is actually a keyword that doesn't bother me in this particular case. I think it works quite well. And again, a beautiful pip style card. And here we have the Ten of Wands with the keyword of burden, and we have our 10 wands all bound up together. I think it's a gorgeous card. I don't read the Ten of Wands as burden, but I think the imagery works well enough that I can read it in a way that works for me. So in our courts, we have princesses, princes, queens, and kings, and which I do quite like. And our Princess of Wands has the keyword of exploration. I do actually quite like that keyword for her, although I do see that more exploring as more of a knightly thing, but it does work well for her as well. And again, a beautiful image. And here we have the Prince of Wands with our keyword of instigation, and he is, he looks quite powerful. I'm not sure what he's instigating here, but it's a still wonderful card. I do quite like his pants. They kind of look like parachute pants to me. And only of those of you who were around in the 80s will know probably what a parachute pant is. But here we have our Queen of Wands with the keyword of vibrancy. And I think she's really beautiful. I do like her for the Queen of Wands. I love her red hair, and I love her dress. And she definitely has her big wand staff type image there. And I think she's gorgeous. And finally, we have our King of Wands with the keyword of leadership. And to me, he looks like Legolas, and that's kind of what I see whenever I see him. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just funny that that's the connection I make with him. And I think he's a wonderful King of Wands, but again, he's very young. So that is our suit of wands. Up next, we have our suit of cups, beginning with Heart Ace and the keyword of love. And I think that works all right for the Ace of Cups. Gorgeous image. I really like that. So here we have the Two of Cups with Union, and another beautiful card. Here we have our Three of Cups with the keyword of friendship, and I think that works quite well. Very traditional Three of Cups. It's our three ladies. Here we have the Four of Cups with the keyword of meditation. Now, I do quite like this keyword, and I really love this pip style image. I think that is absolutely beautiful. This is one of my favorite cards in the deck, despite the fact that it's probably one of the least illustrated cards in the deck. It is more pip style, and I do really like that. And the keyword works well for me. So here we have the Five of Cups with the keyword of disappointment. And, we definitely see the Five Cups with the two toppled over. Again, we see that horizontal line, which is really beautiful. And here we have the Six of Cups with the keyword of innocence. And I do quite like this card. I love that we have the Six Cups, but I love that rather than seeing the children, we have the lovely fawn there. And I just think that's absolutely gorgeous. So here we have the Seven of Cups with the keyword of choices. Again, another one that works really well for me. I like that keyword, and I love this image of the cups. I love that the horizontal line goes through, and we have the light and the dark, and we have, you know, our 7 cups there. I think it's a beautiful card. Here we have our 8 of Cups with the keyword of retreat. And again, another gorgeous card that I really like. And our 9 of Cups with the keyword of fulfillment. Again, another pip style card that I think is really beautiful. And here we have our 10 of Cups with the keyword of harmony. And I do quite like this. It looks rather like an eye, which is, I think, is actually kind of cool. I think that works really well. So here we have our Princess of Cups with the keyword of dream, and she is quite lovely. And our Prince of Cups with the keyword of introspection. And I think he's really interesting. I really do like this image. Again, he looks very, very young to me. Maybe it's just because I'm getting old and everybody's looking younger. But I do love that we can see his reflection, and in the water, it looks like there might be maybe some koi in there, which I think is really lovely. So I do quite like him. Here we have our Queen of Cups with intuition, and she's quite beautiful. Although being that everybody's so young, I feel like these kings and queens wouldn't have enough life experience to serve as kings and queens. But, you know, there were very young kings and queens if you think of back in the day. So he is one of the few characters in this deck that does appear to be a little bit older. So I do quite like him. He is the King of Cups with the keyword of control. And I think he's a really wonderful king. Quite like him. So that is our Suit of Cups. Next, we have our Suit of Swords, beginning with our Ace with the keyword of clarity. Again, another beautiful card. I think it's simple and understated, but works very well. So here we have our Two of Swords with the keyword of decision, which actually works quite well for me. And I think she looks very powerful. And though she has her swords crossed, I think she looks like, you know, she's ready to make that decision. So I think that's really, really great. Here we have our Three of Swords with the keyword of sorrow, and you probably won't be surprised if you've watched my other videos that this card is a bit of a disappointment. And anytime I see the heart with the 3 swords anymore, I'm just, you know, disappointed by it, but we won't get into that again. It's a gorgeously rendered interpretation of the 3 of Swords in terms of a Waite-Smith tradition, so it works really well for that. So here we have the Four of Swords with the keyword of rest, and I do really like this image, and the keyword works pretty well for me as well. I love the 4 squares with the circles radiating out from it and the 4 swords making the cross in the middle. I think it's just wonderful. Works beautifully. Here we have the Five of Swords with the keyword of defeat. And in this one, I definitely do get more of that sense of disruption that I like to see in the 5, so it works really well. Keyword of defeat doesn't really resonate with me, but again, I can work around that or chop those off. Here we have the Six of Swords with the keyword of transition, and I do quite like this image. I think it's very beautiful, very simple, but I think it's gorgeously rendered. So here we have our Seven of Swords, which is one of my favorite images in the deck, despite the fact that it does have that kind of thiefy energy, and the keyword is deception. But he's just so stinking cute. How can you not like him? It's just a gorgeous little card. Even though animal decks usually aren't my favorite, I wouldn't have minded seeing a couple more animals like this, you know, within the deck, because I think the author or the creator just really does a wonderful job creating these sweet little animals. So here we have the Eight of Swords with the keyword of isolation, and it's a very pip style card, which I actually do quite enjoy. I think it's really beautiful. So here we have the Nine of Swords with the keyword of fear, and again we do see another person represented within the numbered card, but I think it works really well. It's definitely a traditional Waite-Smith type of Nine of Swords, but I think it works beautifully. It's just a beautiful card. So here we have our Ten of Swords with the keyword of despair. While I do not really resonate with the keyword, I do love the imagery because she looks like she's wrapped around these swords, but they have not gone through her. She's not been stabbed to death by the swords, and I think that's quite wonderful, because I think that opens that up for people like me who do not read the Ten of Swords as that final death. So here we have our Princess of Swords with the keyword of curiosity, and I think she's quite lovely. Here we have our Prince of Swords with the keyword of determination, and I would say that he definitely does look very determined, and I think that works quite well for him. Here we have our Queen of Swords with the keyword of independent, and I think she is quite beautiful. I do really like her hair and I like her tattoo, but again, very, very young for a queen. And here we have our King of Swords, which again, I'm getting a little bit of a Lord of the Rings vibe from him, and he has the keyword of authority. And I think that works well for the King of Swords. However, he doesn't look very authoritarian. So I think there's a little bit of a disconnect there, but I think he's a really lovely king. So that is our suit of swords. And finally, we come to our suit of discs, which would be pentacles in some decks. And this is generally my favorite suit. So here we have the Ace of Discs with the keyword of wealth, and that keyword does not resonate with me at all. But again, it's just a keyword. I can ignore it, I can chop it off, or I can work my way around it. At any rate, it's just an absolutely beautiful Ace of Discs. So here we have the Two of Discs with the keyword of change, and I do really love this card. This is one of my favorites in the deck, and I like the keyword, I like the imagery. There's just nothing about this card that doesn't work for me. So that's a wonderful thing to be able to say. And here we have the Three of Discs with the keyword of works. I absolutely love this image, again, very Pip style, and I can work with the keyword pretty well on this one, so I think it works really well. Here we have the Four of Discs with the keyword of stability, and again, another one that just works for me on all levels. I love the imagery. The interlocking discs are just absolutely fabulous. That's a wonderful idea. And the keyword of stability really works for me because that is how I see the fours. So here we have the Five of Discs with the keyword of destitution. And I do feel that there's a bit of a disconnect between the imagery and the keyword in this one, but seeing as I don't read the Five of Discs that way, totally works for me. I love the Five Discs that are pictured here in the stained glass window. That's very reminiscent of the Waite Smith cards, but again, beautiful card, just wouldn't pay attention to the keyword. I don't anyway, I should specify, because this is all my point of view, right? To each their own. So here we have the Six of Discs with the keyword of generosity. And again, I think just another beautifully rendered card. I think that you could totally ignore the keyword and work beautifully with that card. And that is one of the things that I do appreciate about this deck, despite the fact that it has the keywords. I think it's really easy to work around them if they don't resonate with you. If they do, that's fabulous. So here we have the Seven of Discs with the keyword of perseverance, which I think is a wonderful keyword. And this these little planets, globes, discs, whatever they are supposed to be, is I believe it's the same that is on the universe card. And we can see that this Seven of Discs is really similar to the universe card. But I think it works quite well because it definitely kind of, to me, it pulls in that sort of chakra, the growth that comes from, that inner work. And I think it works for me. So I think it's beautiful. Here we have our Eight of Discs with the keyword of dedication. And again, another little animal. And I kind of like them in this deck. I love the moon phases. Again, this is another card that really works for me. I think the image is just beautiful. And again, it has that lovely horizontal line that's creating that space, which I think is wonderful. And I think that is one of the strengths of this deck. Here we have the Nine of Discs with the keyword of culmination, and that works quite well for me. And I think it's an absolutely beautiful image. And here we have our 10 of Discs with the keyword of establishment. I love the imagery. Keyword, not so much, but I should probably quit repeating myself where that's concerned, but I think it's a wonderful image. I love all of the different colors and the, culmination or the completion that we see in this card, I think is really lovely. So here we have our Princess of Discs, and she is my favorite in this deck, I think, with the keyword of manifestation. And I love that she's holding the moon. I think that's just wonderful. Here we have our Prince of Discs with the keyword of reliability, and he is, I have to say, really not my favorite, but you know, I can definitely work with him. And here we have our Queen of Discs with the keyword of nurture, and the imagery is, you know, it's all right, it works for me, but I like to see my Queen of Discs more as submerged in nature, in the world, whereas I think of the Queen of Cups more as the nurturer rather than the Queen of Discs. But again, that's just personal preference. If you took that off, I would probably see her as the Queen of Cups. But again, totally personal preference. And here we have our King of Discs with the keyword of power. And I think he's quite lovely. I love that he has this like globe in his hand, or a world. I think he's quite wonderful. So that is our suit of discs. Now that we've taken a stroll through the cards, let's take a look at the guidebook. So this is just a little white book. It is, however, nicely bound and nicely produced. The text is really easy to read, which is really nice. So we have just our table of contents, a little introduction, which is where I found out about the horizontal line, a little bit about reading tarot, a couple of spreads, and we do have the traditional Celtic cross here, and we do have a field spread, which is one that I really like to see when decks include their own spread, and I think that's really lovely, and I definitely want to give that one a try. And then we move into the major arcana, and we have the title, a little bit of information, and some keywords about each of the majors. So then we move into the minor arcana, a little bit about the minors, and we get basically the same thing for the minors, which is quite nice. So we have the title, the keyword, and a little description, and then some additional keywords. So I think that's quite lovely. There's enough here. It's nothing really earth-shattering, but I think there's definitely enough here to help you along in your reading. It definitely leans more towards what the keywords are telling us, the ones that we saw on the cards, but I think it works quite well. Now that we've taken a look at the guidebook, let's go ahead and give this deck a shuffle and pull a few cards. I did want to note just a minute about the cardstock. So the backs are this lovely little galaxy type pattern. The cardstock is matte, and it is quite thick. It's not as thick as the Moonchild, but it is quite a thick deck. But the finish is absolutely wonderful. It's just that lovely matte, kind of a little bit of plasticky feel. Perhaps it might be a touch of a plastic deck, but really nice cardstock on this. It is a bit thick, so you can see there that's quite thick. It is just your standard tarot size deck, but it's still fairly new to me, and it is a bit stiff and a bit difficult to shuffle to get going. But once you get it going, it does shuffle quite well. And I think that once I get it broke in more, it'll probably shuffle better. Can't really bridge it at this point, but you can see I'm getting a nice mix in there. Oh, there I was able to bridge it. It's just a little large. Maybe if I cut those keywords off, that little bit might just make all the difference. Oh, now that I'm getting it going, it's going a little bit better. The cards are a bit sticky, so they don't overhand shuffle quite well. And it's just that matte finish that kind of makes them not, slide around as much. You can see when you try to fan them out, they are a bit, they kind of chunk up a little bit on you. But that will probably work itself out as the cards get worn down a little bit and used a bit more. So let's go ahead and lay a couple cards down and see what we think. There's our King of Cups, our Tower, and the Devil. Interesting. Quite the changes coming on there. So I think you can see it looks really beautiful in a spread, and I've really been loving working with it. I love the simplicity of it, and you know, despite some of the few little inconsistencies and a few little of the things that just don't quite resonate with me, I think it's an absolutely gorgeous deck, and it works beautifully for me. So thank you for joining me for this walk through the field tarot. I hope you enjoyed this stroll through the cards and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.